The warning lights flashed red across the control room of Deep Space Station, Omega 7. Lieutenant Kekstar's 4 eyes blinked rapidly as he stared at the readings on his screen. Something was wrong. Very wrong. "Commander Yulanara," he called out, his voice shaking. "You need to see this." Commander Yulanara floated over to Kekstar Station. Her tentacles moved through the water-filled suit that kept her alive in the station's atmosphere. The Aquatic Federation had built this monitoring station at the edge of known space to watch for threats, but nothing had prepared them for this. "What is it?" she asked, her voice bubbling through the water. "I'm picking up a massive energy signature. It's moving toward us from the outer rim." Kekstar's claws clicked nervously on his controls. "At first, I thought it was a dead star, or maybe a big asteroid. But look at this." The main screen lit up with sensor data. A huge object was moving through space, but it wasn't drifting like dead rock. It was moving with purpose. It had direction. It was under control. How big? Commander Yulanara asked. Kekstar ran the numbers again. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Commander, if these readings are right, this thing is over 200 kilometers long." The water in Yulanara's suit turned a darker blue. This was her species' way of showing fear. "That's impossible. Nothing is that big. Run the scan again. I've run it 5 times already. The readings are the same." Kekstara's voice got quieter. "Commander, there's something else. It's not alone." More dots appeared on the screen. Smaller objects were following the massive one. But even these smaller ships were larger than most battle cruisers. The entire group was moving in perfect formation. "Send an emergency signal to the Galactic Council," Yulanara ordered. "Priority 1. Tell them we have an unknown fleet approaching from deep space." As the signal went out, stations across the galaxy received the alert. At the central command of the Vorthan Empire, Admiral Zethkara Scales turned from green to dark red when he saw the report. The Vorthans had conquered half the galaxy with their massive war fleets. Their dreadnought ships were the biggest and strongest in known space. But this thing made their biggest ship look like a small fighter craft. "Get me visual confirmation," Admiral Zethkara growled to his officers. "I want to see what we're dealing with." 3 hours later, the first images arrived. The officers in the command center fell silent as the pictures appeared on the giant screen. Even Admiral Zethkara, who had seen 1,000 battles, felt his blood turn cold. The ship was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its hull was dark, metal that seemed to absorb light. Scars from old battles covered its surface, but the metal still gleamed with deadly purpose. Strange symbols were carved into its sides. Weapon ports dotted its hull like the eyes of some giant predator. The ship looked like it had been built for one purpose: war. "What are those markings?" One officer whispered. The ship's computer worked to translate the symbols. When the answer came back, the room became even quieter. "Sir," the computer's voice said, "the markings identify this vessel as UE-1 Strike. The symbols appear to be from a language called English." Admiral Zethkara Scales went completely black. "English? That's impossible. Run the analysis." Again. But the computer gave the same answer. "The ship was human. Humans don't exist anymore," another officer said. "We made sure of that 300 years ago." Admiral Zethkara remembered the stories his grandfather had told him. Stories of a species that refused to surrender even when their worlds were burning. Stories of creatures that fought with such fury that they turned impossible defeats into shocking victories. Stories of beings that built weapons so terrible that the entire galaxy had joined together to destroy them. "Contact the other fleet commanders," Admiral Zethkara ordered. "Tell them to prepare for possible combat. And get me a direct link to the Galactic Council. They need to know about this immediately." On the ice world of Crystallos Prime, the Frozen, Brotherhood received the same images. Their leader, Archchieftain Frostclaw, studied the pictures with growing worry. His people were warriors who lived for battle, but even they had legends about the humans. "The Death Speakers return," he whispered in his ancient language. "The Star Killers have come back." His warriors gathered around him, their breath forming clouds in the freezing air. They had heard the old stories passed down through generations. Stories of a war so terrible that it had nearly destroyed the galaxy. Stories of a species so dangerous that every other race had put aside their differences to fight against them. "What do we do, Archchieftain?" asked one of his warriors. Frostclaw looked at the image of the massive ship again. Even on the screen, it seemed to radiate menace. "We prepare. If the humans have returned, then the galaxy will bleed again." Meanwhile, on the crystal homeworld of the ethereal collective, the Ancient Ones emerged from their deep meditation chambers. These beings of pure energy rarely involved themselves in physical matters, but the approaching ship had awakened something in their collective memory. "The flame-bearers walk among the stars once more," spoke the first ancient, its voice like wind through crystal caves. "We had hoped they were gone forever, but hope is a fragile thing." The younger members of the collective didn't understand. "Great Ones, what are these humans? Why do you fear them?" "Fear?" The first ancient's energy flared brighter. "Child, we do not fear them. We remember them. They are the ones who taught the galaxy what true warfare means. They are the ones who showed us that sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything." Back on Deep Space Station Omega-7, more ships were appearing on the sensors. Each one was massive, each one was armed, and each one carried the same strange markings that identified them as human vessels. "Commander," Yelanara watched the growing fleet with growing dread. "How many of them are there?" "I'm counting at least 50 ships, Commander." "Maybe more. They're spread out in a formation I've never seen before." Kekstar's voice was barely a whisper now. "Commander, what if the stories are true? What if humans really are as dangerous as the legends say?" Yelanara didn't answer. She was too busy watching the lead ship, the one called One Strike. It was getting closer now, and even from this distance, she could feel its presence like a weight on her soul. Whatever the humans had become during their 3 centuries in exile, one thing was clear. They had not spent that time learning to be peaceful. The galaxy was about to learn that some species don't die when you try to kill them. Some species just get stronger. And now, those species were coming home. News of the approaching human fleet spread across the galaxy like wildfire. On every world, in every space station, and in every corner of civilized space, the same word was whispered: humans. For most species, humans were just old stories, tales, that parents told their children to make them behave, legends about monsters from the dark spaces between stars. But as the massive ships continued their slow approach toward the galactic core, those old stories suddenly didn't seem so impossible anymore. On the library world of Keeper's Rest, the archivists worked day and night to find any information about the human species. Their vast digital libraries held the history of 10,000 worlds, but most records about humans had been destroyed long ago. Still, some fragments remained. Senior Archivist Telmar found the first useful file buried deep in the restricted archives. His 6 arms moved quickly across the control panels as he pulled up ancient military reports. "Listen to this," he said to his assistant. "This is from a Vorthan battle report, dated 312 years ago. The human defenders refused all offers to surrender, even when their city was completely surrounded and their weapons were destroyed. They continued to fight with whatever they could find. They used broken metal as spears. They threw rocks. They bit and clawed like wild animals. It took us 3 days to capture a city that should have fallen in 3 hours. We lost more soldiers taking that one human settlement than we lost conquering the entire Rigel system. His assistant, a young keeper named Vexilla, shivered despite her thick fur. They sound like animals. No, Telmar said quietly. Animals know when to give up. Read this next report. The screen showed another file, this one even older. It was written in the flowing script of the Ethereal Collective. We have made contact with the species that calls itself human, Talmar read aloud. They are unlike any beings we have encountered. When we shared our knowledge of peace and harmony with them, they thanked us politely. Then they asked if we had any knowledge of better ways to build weapons. They seemed to view conflict not as something to be avoided, but as something to be mastered. This troubles us greatly. As Telmar continued reading, more archivists gathered. Around, each new file painted the same picture. Humans were different. They didn't think like other species. Where most beings sought comfort and safety, humans seemed to seek challenge and struggle. Here's something from the Machine Republic, another archivist said. It's from their war analysis computers. Human tactical thinking does not follow logical patterns. They make decisions that should result in defeat, yet somehow achieve victory. Our war computers cannot predict their actions, because their actions are not based on mathematical probability. They are based on something our systems cannot calculate, the willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Meanwhile, on the hive world of Zarthek Prime, the insectoid swarms were having their own discussions about the returning humans. The swarm queen Ziktau called together her war speakers to share what their collective memory held about the old enemy. The hive mind remembers. She clicked in the musical language of her people. We remember the burning wars. We remember the humans. The war speakers gathered in a circle around their queen. Their compound eyes reflected the dim light as they prepared to share the memories passed down through their genetic code. Tell us, Great Queen, one of them asked. What did the humans do that made them so feared? Ziktau's mandibles clicked together in what humans might have recognized as laughter, though it held no humor. They did something that no other species had ever done. They made the entire galaxy afraid of them. She began to share the memories stored in her DNA. Images flowed from her mind to theirs, showing ancient battles from long ago. We attacked their colony world of New Terra with 1 million warriors, she continued. It should have been an easy victory. The planet had only 50,000 human defenders, and half of those were not even soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, children. The war speakers leaned closer, their attention focused completely on their queen. But humans do not think like we do. When we landed our armies, we expected them to surrender or at least to gather their forces for a proper battle. Instead, every human became a warrior. The farmers used their farming tools as weapons. The teachers turned their schools into fortresses. Even the children fought us with rocks and sticks. One of the war speakers made a confused, chittering sound. But Great Queen, surely superior numbers would still win? That is what we thought, Ziktau replied. But humans have something we do not understand. They call it stubbornness. When a human decides to fight, they do not stop fighting until they win or until they die. There is no middle ground. The memory continued to flow. The war speakers saw images of human defenders who kept fighting even when they were badly wounded. They saw humans who set off explosions that killed themselves just to take some enemies with them. They saw humans who fought for days without food or sleep, driven by something that the logical minds of the insectoids could not understand. We won that battle eventually, the queen continued, but it cost us 800,000 warriors to defeat 50,000 humans. And as we celebrated our victory, we received reports that every human world was preparing for war. Not just their military worlds, but every world. Every human settlement, no matter how small, was turning itself into a fortress. The war speakers were silent as they processed this information. Finally, one of them spoke up. Great Queen, if humans are so dangerous, why did we not simply avoid them? Why did we go to war? Zikta's eyes grew darker. Because, young one, we made the same mistake that every species made. We thought that because humans were small and soft compared to us, they would be easy to defeat. We did not understand that strength comes in many forms. We measured their bodies, but we did not measure their will. On the gas giant Typhon Alpha, the Void Walkers held their own council of war. These energy beings lived in the planet's atmosphere, feeding on electrical storms and magnetic fields. They rarely concerned themselves with physical matters, but the approaching human fleet had stirred memories they had tried to forget. Elder, Storm Rider pulsed with nervous energy as it addressed the gathered collective. The star-touched return. To us, the ones who taught us that even gods can bleed. Explain this to us, Elder, requested a younger Void Walker named Wind Dancer. How can beings of flesh and bone threaten us? We are energy itself. We cannot be destroyed by physical weapons. Storm Rider's form flickered with what might have been remembered pain. That is what we believed, young one. But humans have a gift for making the impossible happen. Do you know what they did when they first encountered our kind? Wayne Dancer and the other young Void Walkers waited for the answer. They studied us. While we were busy feeling superior to these primitive meat creatures, they were learning how we worked. They discovered that although we are made of energy, we still follow certain rules. We still have patterns. And once humans understand the patterns of something, they find ways to break those patterns. Storm Rider's memory reached back 3 centuries to the first and only war between the Void Walkers and humanity. They built weapons that could disrupt our energy forms, devices that could trap us in magnetic bottles, tools that could turn our own electrical nature against us. For the first time in our species' history, we learned what it meant to fear death. The younger Void Walkers pulsed with shock. Their kind had always believed they were immortal, untouchable by the physical universe. But Elder, Wind Dancer asked, surely our superior technology and wisdom gave us advantages? Technology, yes. Wisdom? Storm Rider's form dimmed. Young one, humans taught us that wisdom without will is useless. They may not have had our advanced science, but they had something we lacked, the absolute refusal to accept defeat. When we destroyed one of their research stations, they built 2 more. When we captured their scientists, those scientists found ways to escape and continue their work. When we thought we had beaten them, they came back stronger. As these conversations happened across the galaxy, more and more records were being found. Ancient battle reports, diplomatic files, scientific studies, and personal journals all painted the same picture. Humans were unlike any other species in the galaxy, but perhaps the most chilling discovery came from the archives of the Galactic Council itself. Deep in their most secure files, the current council members found a document that had been sealed for 300 years. It was labeled Final Assessment, Human Threat Level. Council Leader Mordain read the file aloud to the Emergency Assembly. Her voice shook as she spoke the words written by her predecessors. After careful analysis of human military capabilities, psychological profiles, and cultural patterns, this council reaches the following conclusion. The human species represents an existential threat to galactic civilization. Not because of their technology, which is adequate but not exceptional. Not because of their numbers, which are small compared to most major species, but because of their fundamental nature. The council chamber was completely silent as she continued. Reading. Humans do not think like other sapient species. They do not seek. The human fleet entered inhabited space on a Tuesday morning, Galactic Standard Time. Within 6 hours, the galaxy's economy collapsed. Stock markets, they had been stable for centuries, suddenly crashed as traders realized what was approaching. The Vorthan military-industrial complex, which had supplied weapons to half the galaxy for generations, saw their stock price drop by 90% in a single day. Why? Because everyone who looked at the human ships realized that their weapons were already out of date. On the trading world of Commerce Prime, broker Sylvek watched his life's work disappear on the screens in front of him. His tentacles twitched nervously as he tried to understand what was happening. "Sir," his assistant said, her voice high with panic, "the Galactic Defense Fund just lost 40 trillion credits in value. The Insurance Guild is refusing to cover any policies on worlds in the human fleet's path. The shipping corporation has grounded all their vessels." Sylvek had been a trader for 200 years. He had seen wars, plagues, and natural disasters. But he had never seen anything like this. The mere approach of the human fleet was destroying the galaxy's entire economic system. What about the military stocks? He asked, though he already knew the answer. "Worse, sir. Nobody wants to buy weapons anymore. Not when they've seen what human weapons can do." The truth was that everyone who had studied the images of the human ships had reached the same conclusion. The galaxy's military technology was primitive compared to what the humans had built. The weapons on the smallest human escort ship were more advanced than the main guns on the biggest galactic dreadnought. Meanwhile, governments across the galaxy were facing their own crises. On the democratic world of New Athens, President Corellin called an emergency session of the planetary parliament. "Citizens," she announced to the packed chamber, "we must decide our response to the approaching human fleet. Do we fight? Do we flee? Or do we try to negotiate?" The chamber erupted in shouting as representatives tried to make themselves heard over each other. "Fight?" yelled Representative Thaxmar. "With what? Our entire military couldn't destroy one of their escort ships. Then we run," shouted another voice. "Evacuate the planet before they arrive." "Run where?" came the reply. "Every system in the galaxy is panicking. There's nowhere to go." President Corellin tried to restore order, but the fear in the room was too strong. These were beings who had lived their entire lives in a peaceful, stable galaxy. They had never faced a threat like this. On the military world of Fortress Prime, the situation was even worse. General Raxter stood in front of a massive holographic display showing the positions of every military unit in the galaxy. Red dots marked friendly forces. A single blue dot marked the human fleet. The difference in size was terrifying. "Sir," his aide said quietly, "we've run the battle simulations. Even if we gather every military ship in the galaxy, we have less than a 5% chance of victory." General Raxter studied the display. He had spent his entire career preparing for war, but never a war like this. "What if we use the planet?" "Killers?" "The humans seem to have shields that could withstand direct hits from planet-destroying weapons, sir. Our computers estimate that their main ship, the One Strike, could survive the explosion of a small star." The general felt his confidence crumble. He had always believed that sufficient military force could solve any problem. But what do you do when the enemy is simply too strong to fight? As the human fleet continued its approach, entire sectors began to evacuate. The Outer Rim territories, which lay directly in the fleet's path, saw the largest migration in galactic history as billions of beings fled toward the core worlds. But not everyone was running. On the ocean world of Aquatica, the Tide Runners were preparing to fight. Their leader, Admiral Deep Current, gathered her forces in the planet's deepest trenches. "We will not flee like frightened fish," she declared to her assembled warriors. "Our ancestors faced the humans 3 centuries ago. We will face them again." Her warriors clicked their agreement, but even they seemed less confident than usual. The old stories about human naval warfare were particularly frightening to water-dwelling species. Humans, it was said, had learned to fight in environments where most other species couldn't even survive. "Admiral," one of her captains said, "what if the stories about human adaptability are true? What if they've learned to fight underwater as well as they fight in space?" Deep Current's fins flattened against her head. She had been wondering the same thing. "Then we will teach them that the deep waters belong to us." But even as she spoke, she wondered if the humans had already learned that lesson and found a way to master it. The human fleet's progress could be tracked not just by sensor readings, but by the wave of chaos that preceded it. Refugee ships clogged the space lanes as entire populations tried to flee. Pirates and raiders found easy targets among the fleeing civilians. Some star systems declared independence from the Galactic Council, hoping that isolating themselves would make them less attractive targets. On the industrial world of Factory 7, the situation was different. Instead of evacuating, the population was working day and night to build weapons. Factory manager Bolturner had converted every production line to military use. "If the humans want to fight," he announced to his workers, "we'll give them one." These factories built the ships that conquered the Andromeda sector. They can build ships to stop the humans too. His workers, members of the machine race known as the Iron Collective, responded with electronic approval signals. They began producing warships at a rate never seen before in galactic history. But even as they worked, they wondered if it would be enough. The first completed ship rolled off the production line after only 3 days of work. It was a masterpiece of engineering, armed with the most advanced weapons the galaxy could produce. But when the designers compared it to the images of human ships, they realized a disturbing truth. Their newest and most advanced warship was still decades behind human technology. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council was holding emergency session. After emergency session, Council leader Mordain had not slept in 4 days as she tried to coordinate a response to the crisis. "What's the status of the evacuation fleets?" she asked her aide. "Overwhelmed, Counselor. We have 10 billion beings trying to flee the outer rim, but only transport capacity for 2 billion. The refugee camps in the core worlds are already overcrowded. And our military response? Admiral Zethkara is gathering every available ship at the Sigma Point defense line. But the humans will reach inhabited space long before our forces are ready." Mordain looked at the tactical display with growing despair. The human fleet was still moving at a steady pace, not rushing but not slowing down either. They seemed completely confident in their ability to handle whatever the galaxy threw at them. "Have we received any response to our communication attempts?" "No, Counselor. The humans are not responding to any hails. They're not jamming our signals, but they're simply ignoring us completely." This was perhaps the most frightening aspect of the entire situation. If the humans had responded with threats or demands, the galaxy would have known how to react. But the complete silence was unnerving. It suggested that the humans didn't consider the galaxy's current inhabitants worth talking to. As the human fleet approached the first inhabited system in their path, something strange happened. The fleet stopped. For 12 hours, the massive ships hung motionless in space, just outside the system's asteroid belt. Long-range sensors detected unusual activity as smaller craft launched from the main ships and spread out in a complex pattern. Admiral Zethkara watched the human formations from his command ship. "What are they doing?" "Unknown, sir. They appear to be surveying the system." "Surveying for what?" "We're detecting deep space scans, gravitational measurements, and what might be archaeological surveys of the dead worlds in the outer system." This was puzzling. The dead worlds had been uninhabitable for millions of years. Why would the humans be interested in them? Then the answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Yixtel, a xenoarchaeologist who had been studying the dead worlds for decades, sent an urgent message to the Council. "Those worlds aren't naturally dead," she reported. "I've been studying them for 30 years. and all the evidence points to artificial destruction. Someone destroyed the civilizations that lived there long ago. The implications hit everyone. At the same time, the humans weren't just surveying the current inhabitants of the galaxy. They were investigating what had happened to previous inhabitants. They were looking for evidence of other species that had been destroyed. They were looking for a pattern. When the human fleet finally started moving again, their formation had changed. The ships spread out in a defensive pattern that suggested they now considered themselves to be in hostile territory. More weapon ports were visible on their hulls. More fighter craft could be seen patrolling around the larger ships. But most unsettling of all was what happened next. As the human fleet passed through the empty system, they left something behind. A small probe, barely visible to sensors, was placed in orbit around the system's star. Similar probes were left in every system the fleet passed through. Soon, a network of human monitoring devices stretched across the galaxy's outer. The UES-1 strike stopped directly above the capital world of Centralis Prime, casting a shadow that darkened entire continents. For the first time in 3 centuries, a human ship hung in the skies above the seat of galactic government. Surface below, 12 billion beings from 1,000 different species looked up at the massive vessel with fear, wonder, and dread. The ship was so large that it was visible to the naked eye from the planet's surface, a dark spot that blocked out the sun and turned day into an artificial twilight. Council Leader Morgaine stood on the observation deck of the central tower, staring up at the human ship. Her advisors surrounded her, but none of them spoke. What was there to say? After weeks of panic, preparation, and desperate planning, the moment they had all been dreading had finally arrived. "How long has it been there?" she asked. 6 hours. "Counselor," replied her aide. "It arrived at exactly noon, local time, and has remained in a stationary orbit ever since." "Any communication?" "None, Counselor. Just like before, they're not responding to any of our signals." Mordain continued to stare up at the ship. Even from this distance, she could see details of its construction. Weapon ports that could level cities. Shield generators that could probably deflect the full firepower of the galactic fleet. And somewhere inside that massive hull, there were humans. Living humans. "Counselor," another aide interrupted her thoughts. "We're detecting movement around the human ship." "What kind of movement?" "Smaller vessels are deploying from the main ship. They appear to be taking positions around the planet." Morgaine felt her blood turn cold. Were the humans preparing to attack? After all this waiting, were they finally about to see what human warfare looked like in the modern age? But the attack didn't come. Instead, the small human ships simply took up positions around Centralis Prime and waited. They made no aggressive moves, but their presence was unmistakable. The planet was surrounded. Similar scenes were playing out on worlds across the galaxy. Human ships had appeared above every major population center, every military base, and every seat of government. Not attacking, but present, watching, waiting. In the depths of space, Admiral Zethkara commanded the largest military fleet in galactic history. Ships from every major species had joined together in a desperate alliance to face the human threat. But as he watched human vessels position themselves throughout the galaxy, he realized that his fleet was already obsolete. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we count at least 2,000 human ships spread across 47 star systems. They've managed to position forces near every major population center in the galaxy. How is that possible?" Admiral Zethkara demanded. "We've been tracking their fleet for weeks. They only had a few dozen ships. It appears that the ships we were tracking were only the advance force, sir. The main human fleet must have been traveling through areas of space we weren't monitoring." The Admiral studied the tactical display with growing horror. The humans hadn't just returned to the galaxy. They had invaded it. While everyone was focused on the obvious threat of the One Strike and its escort fleet, hundreds of other human ships had quietly moved into position throughout civilized space. "Order, sir?" his tactical officer asked. Admiral Zethkara stared at the display for a long moment. His fleet was powerful, but it was concentrated in one location. The human ships were spread out everywhere. Even if he could defeat the humans in a straight battle, which seemed unlikely, they were positioned to destroy dozens of worlds before his fleet could respond. "Stand down," he said quietly. "All ships maintain position but do not take any aggressive action, sir." "The humans have already won," Admiral Zethkara explained. "We just haven't admitted it yet." Back on Centralist Prime, the waiting continued. Government officials tried to maintain normal operations, but it was impossible to focus on routine business with a human warship hanging in the sky above them. Citizens filled the streets, some fleeing in panic, while others simply stood and stared upward at their uninvited visitors. Then, after 12 hours of silence, something changed. The One Strike's communication array activated. Every radio, television, computer, and communication device on the planet suddenly received the same signal. The transmission was so powerful that it overpowered all other broadcasts. Across the galaxy, the same thing happened on every world where human ships were present. For a moment, there was only static. Then, a voice spoke. It was a human voice, speaking in perfect galactic standard. The accent was strange, unlike any the current generation had heard before, but the words were clear and unmistakable. "Citizens of the galaxy," the voice began, calm and measured. "This is Commander Sarah Chun of the United Earth Ship One Strike, speaking on behalf of the Human Colonial Federation. We have returned." The simple words sent shockwaves through every world, every station, and every ship in civilized space. After 3 centuries of silence, humanity was speaking again. 300 years ago, the voice continued, "You believed you had eliminated us. You were thorough. We'll give you that. Entire worlds burned under your weapons. Fleets were scattered to the void. Families were separated across the dark spaces between stars. Children grew up never knowing the warmth of the sun because no human world was safe from your hunt." On Centralist Prime, Council Leader Mordain listened to the broadcast with growing dread. The human voice was not angry or threatening. If anything, it sounded almost conversational. But there was something underneath the calm tone that made her skin crawl. It was the sound of someone who had been waiting a very long time to have this conversation. "But humans have a saying," Commander Chun continued. "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We spent these centuries in the dark spaces between stars, in the cold void where your species cannot survive. We learned, we grew, we built, we became something new." Images began to accompany the voice. Pictures of human settlements in the deep void, cities built inside asteroids and space stations, constructed in the hearts of nebulae. The galaxy saw humans living in environments that would kill most other species, thriving in conditions that others would consider impossible. "We learned to survive without planets," the voice explained. "We learned to build our cities in space itself. We learned to find resources in places you never thought to look. And most importantly, we learned to work together in ways we never had before." More images flowed across the broadcasts. Human children playing in zero gravity. Human scientists working in laboratories built inside the shells of dead stars. Human engineers constructing ships so massive that they dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. The ships you see around your worlds today represent only a small fraction of our capabilities, Commander Chun said, and for the first time there was a hint of something darker in her voice. "The One Strike is not our most powerful vessel. It is simply the first of many." As if to prove her point, new contacts began appearing on sensor screens throughout the galaxy. More human ships emerging from hyperspace near every major star system. Ships that made even the One Strike look small by comparison. "We have returned not for conquest," the human voice continued, "but for a reckoning. You will answer for what you did to our people." The broadcasts paused, and in that silence, the galaxy held its breath. Then Commander Chon spoke again, and her words changed everything. "We know which species participated in the Great Purge. We know which governments signed the extermination orders. We know which military units carried out the attacks on our worlds. We have spent 3 centuries gathering evidence, collecting testimony, and building our case." The implications hit every listener at the same time. The humans hadn't just been hiding and surviving. They had been investigating. They had been preparing for Judgment Day. "We also know," the voice said, becoming slightly warmer, "which species tried to help us. Which individuals risked their lives to warn human settlements of approaching attacks. Which governments refused to participate in the genocide even when pressured by their allies. We have not forgotten our friends any more than we have forgotten our enemies." On the water world of Aquatica, Admiral Deep Current felt a flicker of hope. Her people had indeed tried to warn human settlements when possible. Perhaps the Tide Runners would not be considered enemies after all. But on the fortress world of Zethkara Prime, Admiral Zethkara felt his heart sink. His people had not just participated in the Great Purge, they had led it. The Vorthan Empire had been the primary force behind the campaign to exterminate humanity. "Over the next several standard days," Commander Chun announced, "we will be making contact with the governments of this galaxy. Some of you will be offered the chance to make amends for past crimes. Others will be given the opportunity to pay compensation for the damage you caused. And some ... The pause stretched out for several seconds. "Some of you will face justice of a different kind." The broadcast continued for another hour, but the message was clear. Humanity had returned, and they had brought with them a detailed accounting of every crime committed during the Great Purge. They had evidence, they had weapons, and they had the will to use both. But perhaps most terrifying of all was what the humans didn't say. They made no demands for immediate surrender. They set no ultimatums. The galaxy's response to humanity's return was swift and chaotic. Within hours of Commander Chun's broadcast, governments across civilized space began falling apart. On the corporate world of Trade Station Alpha, the board of directors held an emergency meeting. Chairman Velkoff paced nervously around the conference table as his fellow board members argued about their next move. "We have to offer them something," insisted Director Malcross. "Our trade records show we sold weapons to the Purge fleet." "If the humans have that information—" "Of course they have it," Velkoff snapped. "They've had 300 years to gather evidence. The question is, what do we offer them that might save our lives?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Director Silton, the youngest member of the board, had been quietly accessing the company's historical databases. "We also help them," she said suddenly. "Look at these records from 302 years ago. We sold medical supplies to human refugee ships. We provided fuel to human vessels trying to escape the Purge fleet. We even hired human traders when other companies wouldn't." A glimmer of hope passed through the room. Perhaps their company's history wasn't entirely black after all. Similar conversations were happening on worlds throughout the galaxy. Some species discovered that their ancestors had indeed participated in the Great Purge. Others found evidence that their people had tried to help human refugees. But most found a mixture of both. Some individuals who had committed crimes, and others who had tried to do the right thing. The humans, meanwhile, remained silent and patient. Their ships stayed in position around major worlds, but they made no aggressive moves. They simply waited, allowing the galaxy time to examine its own conscience. 3 days after the broadcast, the first formal response came from an unexpected source, the ocean world of Aquatica. Admiral Deep Current personally piloted a small diplomatic vessel up to the human ship in orbit around her world. As she approached the massive vessel, she was surprised to receive a communication from the humans. "Admiral Deep Current," came a voice from the human ship. "We have been expecting you. Permission granted to dock at Bay 7. The fact that they knew her name and rank was unsettling, but Deep Current pressed on. She had come too far to turn back now. The docking bay of the human ship was vast, enough to hold her entire vessel with room to spare. As she disembarked, she was met by a human wearing what appeared to be a military uniform, though unlike any design she had seen in the old records. "Admiral Deep Current," the human said, offering what her species recognized as a respectful greeting. "I am Captain Rodriguez. Welcome aboard the UE's Leviathan." Deep Current was surprised. The human spoke her language perfectly and seemed to understand Tide Runner customs. "You know our ways," she observed. "We have had 3 centuries to study." Captain Rodriguez replied, "We remember that your people tried to warn our settlements when the Purge fleet was approaching. Many human lives were saved because of Tide Runner courage." Relief flooded through Deep Current. "Then you do not consider us enemies?" "No, Admiral. We consider you friends who were caught in an impossible situation. Come, Commander Chun is waiting to speak with you." As they walked through the corridors of the human ship, Deep Current was amazed by what she saw. The technology was clearly far advanced beyond anything the galaxy currently possessed, but it was also different in philosophy. Where galactic ships were built for efficiency and standardization, human ships seemed to be built for adaptability and growth. "Your ships are alive," she said suddenly. Captain Rodriguez smiled. "In a sense, yes. We learned to build our vessels like living organisms, able to grow, adapt, and repair themselves. It was necessary for survival in the deep void." They entered a large chamber where Commander Chun was waiting. The human leader was younger than Deep Current had expected, but her eyes held the weight of centuries. "Admiral," Commander Chun said, "thank you for coming. Your people's actions during the Purge have not been forgotten. We would like to discuss how our species can work together in the future." Over the next several hours, Deep Current and Commander Chun negotiated the first formal alliance between humanity and another galactic species in 3 centuries. The agreement was fair and respectful, acknowledging past wrongs while building toward a better future. But not all first contacts went so smoothly. On the fortress world of Zethkara Prime, Admiral Zethkara received a very different message from them. The humans. Instead of an invitation to talk, he received a formal legal document listing his species' crimes during the Great Purge. The list was comprehensive. Dates, locations, casualty numbers, and individual commanders responsible for each. Atrocity. The humans had indeed spent 3 centuries building their case, and their evidence was overwhelming. At the bottom of the document was a simple statement: "The Vorthan Empire will answer for these crimes. Prepare your defense. Admiral Zethkara." Read the document with growing despair. His people had not just participated in the Purge, they had led it. The evidence showed that Vorthan commanders had been responsible for the destruction of over 40 human worlds and the deaths of billions of innocent civilians. But even worse was the final page of the document. It contained a list of Vorthan, individuals who had tried to help humans during the Purge. The list was short, but it existed. Some members of his species had chosen compassion over hatred, even when it went against orders. "These individuals and their descendants will be protected," the document stated. "The rest of you will face judgment." As word of the human legal proceedings spread through the galaxy, a clear pattern emerged. Species that had helped humans were offered friendship and alliance. Species that had remained neutral or offered the chance to establish normal diplomatic relations. But species that had actively participated in the genocide faced a very different future. The humans had divided the galaxy into 3 categories: friends, neutrals, and enemies. And they had the power to enforce those distinctions. 6 months. After the one strike first appeared above Centralus Prime, the new galactic order was becoming clear. Human ships now patrolled the major space lanes, not as conquerors, but as peacekeepers. Pirates and raiders who had plagued merchant vessels for centuries suddenly found themselves facing human warships that could destroy entire fleets with ease. Trade, routes that had been dangerous for generations, became safe overnight. The humans didn't demand tribute or taxes for their protection. They simply made it clear that attacking innocent vessels would result in swift retaliation. But for species that had participated in the Great Purge, life became much more difficult. The Vorthan Empire found their military restricted to their home system. The rigid hierarchists discovered that their requests for trade agreements were ignored. The Eternal Dominion learned that their ambassadors were no longer welcome on neutral worlds. The humans didn't need to attack these species directly. They simply made it clear that anyone who did business with former genocide perpetrators would find themselves cut off from human trade and protection. Given the humans' obvious technological and military superiority, most species chose to side with humanity. On Centralus Prime, Council Leader Mordain watched this transformation with mixed feelings. The galaxy was certainly more peaceful now, but it was peace enforced by human power rather than galactic cooperation. Counselor, her aide reported, the human representative is here for your weekly meeting. These meetings had become routine over the past several months. Commander Chun, or one of her representatives, met with galactic leaders regularly to discuss the transition to the new order. Today's representative was someone Mordain had not before, a human who introduced himself as Ambassador Williams. Ambassador, Mordain said, I must ask you directly, what are humanity's long-term intentions for the galaxy? Ambassador Williams considered the question carefully before answering. Council Leader, humanity learned something important during our exile. We learned that trying to control everything leads to weakness, not strength. We don't want to rule the galaxy. Then what do you want? We want justice for the crimes committed against us. We want assurance that such crimes will never happen again. And we want to build a galaxy where different species can coexist without resorting to genocide. Mordain found herself believing the humans' words. Over the months since their return, humanity had shown remarkable restraint. They could have easily conquered the galaxy, but instead they had chosen to reshape it through economic and diplomatic pressure. What about the species that participated in the purge? She asked, will you eventually forgive them? Ambassador. Williams was quiet for a long moment. Forgiveness is possible, Council Leader, but it requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing, genuine remorse, and concrete steps to make amends. Some species have already begun this process. Others still deny that they did anything wrong. As if to illustrate his point, a news report appeared on the chamber's screens. The Vorthan Empire had just announced a formal apology for their role in the Great Purge, along with a commitment to pay reparations to human survivors. It was the first time in their species' history that the proud Vorthans had ever admitted to being wrong about anything. They're learning, Ambassador Williams observed. It may take time, but most species will eventually understand that the old way